Everybody knows that organized crime is in drugs, prostitution, and gambling. What everybody doesn't know is that organized crime may have worked its way into another big money area, the construction of a nuclear power plant. The one just completed at Shoreham, New York, a suburb of New York City, fits that picture. When construction of Shoreham began in 1969, the projected cost was $261 million. The completed cost was $4.2 billion. But it wasn't just the huge cost overrun that caught the attention of New York State and Suffolk County, where the plant is located. They say the plant is unsafe, that people living around the plant can't be evacuated in case of an emergency, and that the plant has no security against sabotage. And recently, as Ed Bradley reports, former employees have come forward with accounts of negligence and criminal activity by corrupt unions during the construction of Shoreham.
The Teamsters ran one whole side of the plant. We used to call it the Teamster area, or the west end of the plant. And to do inspections in that area, you were required to make an appointment, give a phone call, let them know when you would be coming up to that area.
George Henry was a quality control inspector for 2 years at the Shoreham nuclear plant. His job was to see to it that the safety systems of the nuclear reactor, the systems designed to protect both workers in the plant and the general public once the plant was in operation, were constructed according to the regulations of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Henry told us what he has told the county legislature and the FBI, that he and his fellow inspectors were often unable to do their job properly because of the power of the unions.
We had several situations where they would just throw down their tools and walk off the job or get extremely indignant.
Jock McChrystal's job at Shoreham was to make sure the right parts and materials were used in a particular phase of construction. Often, he says, workers substituted the wrong materials without authorization. And, as he told the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, there was outright sabotage of perfectly good work.
Sabotage of work?
Absolutely. How that would occur would be you and I are a gang, a steam fitter gang. 2 men make up a gang, okay? Our assignment is to put in a gauge, all right? Any kind of gauge. One of us goes off and gets the quality control inspector. The other guy gets to lollygag around. Now, if a quality control inspector doesn't show up for 5 hours, you're still making $19 an hour, right? No problem. Meanwhile, you sit around. That's one of the reasons why plant costs so much. Okay, the quality control inspector shows up. He does his 30-second bid. He gives it a visual inspection. Maybe he measures the size of the weld bead. He says, okay, he signs off on it, and he leaves. In the process of gathering up your tools, you look around, you take your chipping hammer, you whack the glass on the front of the gauge. It's no longer calibrated correctly because the seal's been broken, and the next shift gets to cut it out, and another shift gets to put it in. More work for you, more work for the next guy.
Same job done twice.
Same job done 4 and 5 times sometimes. I mean, that, you know, there's no reason, but absolute union control for the fact that the job went on for 15 years.
Both McChrystal and Henry say they witnessed theft at the plant. The first time Henry saw a large piece of equipment disappear into a waiting truck outside the Shoreham fence, he couldn't believe it.
I happened to witness a cement mixer in midair, and I thought this was kind of strange at the vantage point that I had at the time in the plant. So I had to walk around the other side of the building, and sure enough, the cement mixer was in the air. It was hanging on the end of a crane, and it was being hoisted over the outside perimeter of the chain link fencing of the plant.
Did you see theft there?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, theft was so organized that sometimes 2 and 3 different unions were involved.
McChrystal told us theft wasn't the only problem.
And there were problems with the way they did testing. There were problems with the worker qualifications. Many times, I mean, there were people in charge who didn't graduate out of high school, who were in charge of the Class 1 nuclear safety systems. People who were on hard drugs as inspectors.
Hard drugs?
Hard drugs, needle drugs. I mean, want me to say it that way? Needle drugs. Guys who were out of Vietnam, who became junkies over there, came back here. You got to remember, Shoreham's the largest work site in the history of New York State. The unions controlled the whole place. They put their If they had a guy who needed a year to go on his retirement, put him in Shoreham, let him coast. If they had a guy that was in trouble, he was onto drugs, and he might fall off a building here in New York, put him in Shoreham, let him stare at the water. That was the way it was. And that's the way the plant was built.
These were things you saw with your own eyes?
Yes, sir.
Can the stories Henry and McChrystal told us, and which they have told to federal and state authorities, can their stories of union control and corruption be believed? Lieutenant Remo Franceschini of the New York City Police Department thinks so.
Who actually ran the show at Shoreham?
I would say the unions actually ran the show at Shoreham.
And the unions were controlled by?
In many instances by organized crime.
Unions involved in the construction of a nuclear power plant controlled by organized crime? Absolutely, says Lieutenant Franceschini. His police unit tracks organized crime in the New York metropolitan area.
I think they have a great influence in the construction business. They pack the unions with their own people, and eventually they take over the unions by sheer numbers. And then through intimidation and threats, it's very difficult to fight them in a union situation.
Who controlled the unions at the Shoreham construction site?
The laborers' union had great influence from the Lucchese crime family. Indirectly, Lucchese crime family controlled many of those laborers out in Shoreham. And the people that really produced the supplies there, the Teamsters Union, was controlled by the Gambino crime family.
Is there any doubt in your mind but that organized crime had their hands in the construction of that plant and took money out of it?
There's no doubt in my mind.
The Shoreham plant in Suffolk County, a $4 billion cost overrun. How much of that can be attributed to the mob?
I would say millions. For the simple reason that was a very long endeavor, by a builder and by builders. It's a perfect pork barrel for organized crime to reap money out of that systematically over the years. On no-show jobs, on kickbacks, on be able to get rid of stolen merchandise that they come into.
Did the Nuclear Regulatory Commission know about the role of organized crime in some of the unions at Shoreham? They should have if they had followed the trial of this man, Dan Cunningham, now serving a prison term for labor racketeering. Cunningham owned, that's the only word for it, he owned the security guards union that provided guards for Shoreham. Ken McCallion was a special prosecutor with the organized crime unit of the Justice Department. He handled Cunningham's trial.
Well, I believe it's a matter of public record that Daniel Cunningham purchased the union for a sum of money from the former president of the Allied International Union of Security Guards and Special Police. It's also been documented that that union has been controlled by organized crime from the time of its inception in the late 1960s. While Daniel Cunningham was president of the union, there were never any elections held. He bought the union and he used the union to maximize his return on his particular investment.
Cunningham's control of the security guards union enabled him to cut sweetheart deals with the people who hired his members.
Cunningham was in a position in negotiating union contracts and fringe benefits where he had a fair amount of discretion. And obviously, an employer's profits, to a large extent, are determined by the union contract. So Mr. Cunningham had substantial leverage over really any employer.
That control over the security guards, law enforcement officials say, is what got the guards to look the other way when equipment was stolen under their noses. But what about the deficiencies reported by inspectors to the Long Island Lighting Company? They were supposed to be passed on to the NRC and the deficiencies corrected. But Henry told us that instead, his superiors would tell him to rewrite the reports, and that when work didn't live up to required standards, the standards would be lowered. He told us about one major problem, a diesel generator that was to take over in a power failure to prevent a meltdown in the reactor core.
One day a diesel broke.
Yes.
And the crankshaft broke?
Yes, the crankshaft 7 and 2.
And now this was, you had warned that there may be a problem here.
Myself and several other inspectors had written numerous, I'm talking about hundreds, of deficiency reports on the diesel generators a year and a half to 2 years, or even further back, but nothing was, no scrutiny was given to these reports.
But when it did happen, your superiors had to say, George, you were right?
You would think they would say that. I was suspended. I was suspended the next working day, yes.
Why?
It was quite obvious that they didn't want me around any longer to see the fix or whatever they were going to do with the dilapidated diesel at this point. So I was escorted off the site by the security force.
If you testified, if you came forward, you were immediately ostracized. And if not ostracized, outright threatened. I mean, I had all kinds of overt threats and actual things happened to me. Things dropped out of the sky, a bucket of bolts one day. The next day, a ladder fell next to me. That was it. I mean, 3 strikes, I might have been out. So I left.
Local law enforcement officials told us they knew of no illegal or unsafe activities during the 15 years the plant was under construction. How could that be? Well, the site was and still is private property. Only Lilco and the NRC have the right to enter, to make inspections, or to give others permission to do so. So we asked them to give us a look and to answer some questions. Questions that had been raised not just by us, but by the governor of New York, by Suffolk County officials, and by people who live in this area. The NRC said they couldn't talk with us because they're involved in judging the plant. However, it should be pointed out that there are no regulations that prohibit them from talking with us. And Lilco said they wouldn't permit us on the site, and they also said that it wouldn't be beneficial for them to grant our request for an interview. But it's not just 60 Minutes that can't get into the plant. Neither can local government officials. Wayne Prospect is a member of the Suffolk County Legislature.
The county attempted to have an independent inspection of the Shoreham nuclear power plant. We made pleas to Long Island Lighting Company. As a matter of fact, the county did the unprecedented thing when they appropriated $3 million for the express purpose of hiring an independent group of engineering experts to go out at Shoreham. But again, Lilco said no.
Prospect initially wanted the inspection of Shoreham because county cement inspectors had told him that the concrete used in the reactor containment building might be no good. And who was in charge of deliveries of concrete at Shoreham? John Cody, the head of the Teamsters Local, and an associate of the Gambino and Lucchese crime families, who is now serving a 5-year prison term for labor racketeering. At Cody's trial, it was revealed that, in general, if he didn't get a kickback from contractors, they wouldn't be able to deliver concrete. And who did get that concrete job at Shoreham? In some cases, the same contractors who had earlier supplied defective concrete for the county sewer system. New York Governor Mario Cuomo thinks Shoreham is unsafe and has had as little success as we have in getting the local records to find out if that is indeed the case.
I am the governor of the state. We have nearly 18 million people. You're supposed to take care of the health and welfare of your people. Here's this enormous threat to our people, and I don't have a veto power over it. And I went to Washington, I said, that's wrong. I said, you people under President Reagan believe in the new federalism. You're always talking about states' rights. You're always talking about giving us the responsibility. I'll take it. Give me, the governor of the state of New York, the responsibility to deal with this plant, and I'll handle it. They won't do it.
The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has publicly, at least, said nothing about the reports of corruption and the organized crime connection in the unions at Shoreham. And despite the objection from the state and the county, the NRC granted a low-power license to Shoreham late last month. But after the FBI began looking into George Henry's allegations, and under pressure from a lawsuit brought by New York, which charged that Shoreham did not meet the NRC's own security rules, it withdrew the license. The Long Island Lighting Company is appealing that decision.
A Mercedes owner with an eye for exceptional cars has just seen one. The Continental Mark 7. He wants to get a better look at it. content with the knowledge that this new mark gives Mercedes something it hasn't had before. Competition. The Continental Mark 7.
Hi. I spend 3 months a year living out of a suitcase. So, I always stay at a Quality or Comfort Inn. They give me the same room and service as the other big lodging chains, but for less money. I just call toll-free to make reservations for all my business trips and even family vacations.
Daddy, are we there yet?
Just dial 800-228-5151. Make the quality choice and see how affordable quality lodging can be.
So where you from?
Warsaw.
Huh? Hey, I got an uncle from there. Or was it Krakow?
Warsaw is a famous name in business insurance.
Hey, maybe you know him. Paul Zakowski?
Sorry.
But some people have trouble placing us.
Where's Warsaw?
Wisconsin.
Oh, welcome to America.
Oh, Warsaw Insurance.
That's Warsaw.
W-A-U-S-A-U.
Right.
Warsaw.
We're the business insurance experts from Warsaw.
Whatever.
Tonight, a cabaret owner's gunned down.
Who shot him?
And Angela Lansbury's caught in a baffling maze of backstage desires.
Oh, dear.
Gabe Kaplan, Jeannie Francis, and Martin Landau guest on Murder, She Wrote. Then on Crazy Like a Fox, Harry's set up for murder.
I'm innocent.
But when they pursue the killer, hounds track the foxes. And Trapper John and JJ face a damaging
malpractice suit.
He was bleeding to death.
I can't believe this is happening.
Well, it is. You better get used to it.
All tonight.
We spent last Monday in Plains, Georgia with Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States, and he was surprisingly candid on the subject of Ronald Reagan. He devotes his days now to writing, fishing, farming, and teaching, and says that he's happy doing it, that he doesn't look wistfully at Washington and the power that resides there. His Democratic Party has turned its back on him, and he acknowledges that the American people would just as soon forget the Carter years.
These aren't easy questions to ask, sitting in a man's living room, but the Carter image, the political image, is that of a loser. Why?
Well, it may be easier to ask a question than it is to answer it, but I'll be glad to answer it. Well, my last political encounter was with Reagan in November of 1980, and I lost. And I think that's the image that still remains in people's minds, that I was not reelected.
You must be very jealous, in a sense, of Ronald Reagan.
Not really.
I'm jealous of the fact that he is, I mean, if his is the Teflon presidency,
yes,
nothing sticks.
Mine was the opposite.
Yours was the flypaper presidency.
I think that's true. When I was there was no doubt who was responsible.
Buck stops here.
I was responsible. Now there is a great doubt about who's responsible, and Reagan has been extremely successful, more than any of his 39 predecessors, in not being responsible for anything that's unpleasant or completely or not completely successful.
Well, how does he manage that, Mr. President?
Well, he's blamed me for his $200 billion deficits. He's blamed me and Ford and Nixon for his lack of understanding of the Lebanon crisis, saying that this intelligence network was not adequate for him. He's blamed the Congress for his withdrawal of the Marines from Lebanon under, very damaging circumstances. And he has never accepted responsibility for lack of progress in Middle East peace or lack of progress on alleviating the problems of the poor and so forth. And he's been remarkably successful in telling people, everything's okay. At least as far as I'm concerned, everything's okay. It's okay for the Marines to be embarrassed and damaged in Lebanon. It's okay to have $200 billion deficits. It's okay to have $120 billion trade imbalances and so forth.
Say it's okay, Mr. President. I mean,
he said it's okay with him, and he's not responsible. Don't associate him as president with any of these problems. We have now almost doubled our nation's debt since Reagan has been in office. When I left the White House, the United States of America was the greatest creditor nation on earth. By the end of this year, we'll be the greatest debtor nation on earth. And we're now seeing a wave of economic suffering in the agricultural community of our country, which is the most evident first indication of Reagan's policies. I think the second indication will be a continued deterioration in the banking and financial institutions of our country. So, you know, what will be the Reagan heritage is too early to say. I cannot think of a single international or diplomatic achievement that's been realized by Ronald Reagan.
President Carter has written a new book on the Middle East called Blood of Abraham. We asked him what bold new moves he might undertake there now if he were president.
There is no reason why George Shultz can't sit down with Yasser Arafat if they want to make a bold new stroke.
If who wants to make a bold new stroke?
If the United States wants to make a bold new stroke, and the people in the Middle East.
Would you recommend that now?
Yes, I think that would be a good move, yes.
What's going to be the outcry in Israel if such a meeting were to take place?
We could make, well, you know, there has to be a willingness to face outcries. And I don't see any way for any substantive progress to be made in the Middle East peace process without the Palestinians being intimately involved in the process.
But it's not just the Middle East that worries him, it's war and peace.
You think we're closer to war today than we should be?
I think we have let the world know that our country is no longer the foremost proponent or user of negotiations and diplomacy, and that our country's first reaction to a troubled area on earth is to try to inject American military forces or threats as our nation's policy.
Human rights under Ronald Reagan.
Well, Reagan has basically abandoned our nation's commitment to the human rights policy that we espoused.
Why? Because he's a callous man?
I think part of it was a natural adverse reaction to my administration's policies. One of his first moves, for instance, was to send Mrs. Kirkpatrick to snuggle up to Pinochet in Chile and to the military junta in Argentina, who had been responsible for more than 10,000 deaths through those who disappeared in the middle of the night. And this was a clear signal that went all over the world that the previous human rights policy under my administration was being changed. I don't know what his motivations are, but the result has been that the world now sees our country as not being a champion of human rights, but as being dormant at best in the face of persecution.
I think this president makes us comfortable with our prejudices.
That's not very nice, what you're saying.
But it's the way I feel, and I think it's true.
Despite rumors that she might run for governor of Georgia, Rosalind Carter says she has no political ambition. But she is no less candid about President Reagan than is her husband.
I think he's been devastating to the country. And
how? How has he devastated the country?
Well, I wouldn't trade places with him in history, with Jimmy and Ronald Reagan, for anything in the world, unless I'll qualify that because he could correct some of those things in this thing. But the big budget deficit that I think is going to, that my grandchildren will have to pay for, that's going to hurt us forever. He did not even have a single gesture of goodwill toward the Soviet Union the whole first 4 years.
Since they left Washington, the Carters have returned to a simpler life in Plains. On Sundays, they and their daughter Amy, now near college age, worship at Baptist services. The president teaches Sunday school here, frequently attended by large groups of visitors, tourists.
Have my joy fulfilled in themselves. How much joy were the disciples going to have? Not much.
Okay, you want us in there now, too?
Yeah, we will.
And after church, the president patiently poses for pictures and signs autographs for folks who have stopped by to meet Plains' sole tourist attraction. Twice a week, he travels to Atlanta, where he teaches liberal arts courses as a distinguished professor at Emory University. But his roots and his heart, he says, are in Plains. Still, though, he will talk politics when prodded.
Good to see you. Just fine.
Is hands-on political experience a must for a president? Could a Lee Iacocca conceivably be as good a president as a Jimmy Carter or a Ronald Reagan?
Well, I know he could be as good as one of us. Whether he could be as good as both of us, I really don't know. But I think that that sort of approach to American life that Lee Iacocca has exemplified would be very beneficial in the White House.
But he's never been elected to office. Does that necessarily put him beyond the pale for the presidency?
No, because he would have to go through a very torturous and difficult political campaign to get there. And so that his absence of experience in the political field would obviously be filled while he was running for president.
Sounds like Jimmy Carter's going to run an Iacocca for president campaign.
I have an admiration for him.
You do?
Sure.
One of the personal low points of his presidential years, he acknowledges, was his collapse while jogging in a mountain marathon.
You remember this, Mr. President?
Sure.
Do you think that in the final analysis, that episode did you any harm politically?
It probably did. I think that showed that I had tried something I couldn't finish, and that I had attempted something where I didn't succeed.
And it had nothing whatsoever to do with politics or governmental affairs or...
Well, you know, politics is a matter of image, and the image that I had attempted something that I didn't accomplish, I think did have political connotations. But around in the cemetery...
His mother, Miss Lillian, died 2 years ago. He took us to the Carter burial plot in Plains.
You were very, very close to your mother.
Yes, I was. Mama helped shape my life. Mother, even in the difficult years of racial segregation down here, Mother was I guess was a token liberal, the token integrationist around Plains. And she's always the champion of the underdog, and at that time, of course, the blacks were the underdogs. So Mama was, well, she was really inspirational. After my father died, Mother kind of blossomed forth.
Miss her?
Yes, very much so. Particularly when early in the mornings, I used to go out before daybreak, and Mom and I would just talk about politics or sports or family affairs, and kind of watch the sun come up together in the morning. Even when she was in her last month, she knew she had cancer, and she knew that she wouldn't live very long, but she was always an exciting companion.
You know, I have one memory on television of watching you and Ted Kennedy on the platform back in 1980. Was that a bitter time for you? And does any of that bitterness remain toward Ted Kennedy?
Well, I don't think, maybe bitter is the right word. We didn't feel, and I still don't feel, that Kennedy had any reason to challenge me as an incumbent Democratic president and therefore destroy the unity of a party which is so crucial. And about the only time the Democratic Party has a chance to be unified is when there's an incumbent Democratic president. Mm-hmm. And I think that the primary season with Kennedy never giving up even until the convention assembled gave us a tremendous obstacle to overcome in the fall election. And I think that it would be highly unlikely that Ted Kennedy would ever be approved as a potential president by the American people. He's always done best when he didn't have a chance to win.
So you think that next time around, whatever is the image of Ted Kennedy in the mind of the American people, it will not have changed sufficiently for them, for the Democratic Party, to give him the nomination?
That's right. That's my expectation and also my hope.
Now you've got style, fun,
light and elegant entrees like shrimp creole, beef burgundy, lasagna Florentine, all less than 300 calories.
chic, taste, grace, ooh, nice.
It's great for your image.
For years, computer companies have attacked IBM's hold on data processing, only to be slapped down. Again and again. Some were too small, some too slow, and some just didn't have the weapons to fight back. Until Wang. Wang mini computers have the firepower to blow IBM data processing right out of the office. Just give us a shot. Wang. We're gunning for IBM.
60 Minutes, a CBS News weekly magazine, will continue.
The story of a remarkable boy and an extraordinary animal.
Told me this thing can talk.
And they'd come to mean everything to each other.
We have a dangerous animal out there.
In a world that couldn't understand. No! James Farentino, Tess Harper, Louise Fletcher, and Burt Young in A Summer to Remember. Wednesday at 8, 7 Central and Mountain.
This is CBS.
We set out to make a yogurt different from the rest. That yogurt is Whitney's. From the first spoonful, Whitney's is unlike any yogurt you've tasted. Forget all you've heard about the others. Here is yogurt. Here is fruit. Not sugary preserves, but whole chunks in its own juice. And all 100% natural. Taste the difference in Whitney's, and taste what all the excitement's about.
Watch News 22 tonight at 11.
If you've ever been so upset by a situation that you walked away muttering, somebody ought to do something about this, you'll appreciate this story. Back in 1983, two housewives saw something and decided that not only should something be done, but that they would be the somebodies to do it. At the time, they were looking for a nursing home in which to place an elderly relative. What they saw became an obsession. Paula Snyder went along with her best friend, Joanne Wells, to check out the Golden Age Nursing Home in Brownsville, Pennsylvania. At the time, they were looking for a nursing home in which to place an elderly relative. What they saw became an obsession. Paula Snyder went along with her best friend, Joanne Wells, to check out the Golden Age Nursing Home in Brownsville, Pennsylvania.
We saw people laying naked on bare mattresses that had no sheets. We saw a full bedpan sitting next to food trays on people's bedside stands. There were holes in the wall. The smell was just unbelievable. I have never been any place that I smelled anything like that. It just reeked with urine and other terrible smells.
Joanne Wells and Paula Snyder dedicated themselves to closing down the Golden Age Nursing Home. So far, the federal government has cut off Medicare and Medicaid funds, and the state of Pennsylvania has revoked the home's license. The home remains open, while its owner, Frank Bach, appeals the action. The two women are not claiming victory just yet. They've been disappointed before. They recall the first time they complained to the state, back in May 1983.
A surveyor from the health department went out and to investigate our complaint. And she called us on the phone and said that all of our complaints were founded. She said that it was the worst nursing home that she had seen in her 9 years as a surveyor with the state health department. And she said the only way it would ever be brought into compliance is if they bulldozed it to the ground and started all over again. So we really felt that something was going to be done because she had recommended at that time that it be withdrawn from the Medicare and Medicaid program and also that the license be revoked.
Did that happen?
No, it didn't.
Instead, when they checked again with the Pennsylvania Department of Health, they were told the opposite, that the home was turning around, was being cleaned up. Then, in August of 1983, 4 months after they had been inside the Golden Age home, the housewives, by chance, spoke to another state inspector named Barbara Peters. She told them to keep the pressure on because the health department was not giving them the real story.
That, in effect, we were being lied to. And Barbara told us about the horrendous conditions she had seen.
Barbara Peters had visited 50 nursing homes for the state of Pennsylvania before she quit her job as a surveyor a few months ago. Her worst memories, she says, are of the time she visited the Golden Age home.
And I remember opening the bedpan flusher, and it was all full of bugs, and there was things, stringy things hanging there, and there was a skeleton of what looked like a rat. It was half smashed in the skeleton of a rat. And I was terrified, and I had nightmares because at the time I was pregnant, and I was so afraid of getting bit by something or just having something happen to me or the baby while I was in there.
The housewives became convinced, after talking to Barbara Peters, that incompetence, bureaucratic bumbling, and inertia were letting the home off the hook. Haunted by what they had seen there, they launched a letter-writing campaign that continues to this day. And they learned about the Freedom of Information Act. They wrote hundreds of letters and received dozens of documents.
And what we saw after reviewing all these records back as far as 1972, this was normal for this facility. Not to have nurses, not to have sheets, for the housekeeping to be deplorable, and always with a promise from the owner of when he would correct the problem, but he never did. Since 1977, there has never been an inspection that he hasn't been cited for not having a licensed nurse. Well, how do you run a nursing home without a nurse?
Are we talking about a place that maybe was unpleasant, but was not necessarily endangering the health of the patients?
We're talking about a concentration camp right here in Pennsylvania that was licensed.
To see what this is all about, we asked Barbara Peters, the former state inspector, to visit the Golden Age home with us. After all the horrible things we had heard, we thought maybe we were in the wrong place. And Barbara couldn't believe that this was the same home that she had recently found so deplorable. They knew you were coming, is what Barbara said to us. Mrs. Peters had told us of being in this area once and seeing a woman so dehydrated that her saliva had formed a ladder to the table and flies were swarming up that ladder.
Saliva was so thick it formed a string from her mouth to the table.
So this place looks a lot better.
Yeah, very much.
She recalled being in this ward when the stench was overpowering. Is it possible that a certain amount of odor with patients like these is almost impossible to avoid?
Well, if the patients are checked and changed regularly, there shouldn't be the overwhelming odor.
It's not overwhelming today.
No, today it isn't.
Looks like they painted the whole place.
Yeah, looks like they've done a lot of painting since I was here last.
It was evident that virtually everything had recently been covered with a fresh coat of paint. The bathrooms were clean. The sheets looked new and clean. About half the 70-bed home was empty because for a time the state was barring new admissions. There was no shortage of nurses on this day. A room full of nurses and relatives of patients had been gathered to plead the case for keeping the home open. When we asked them to explain all the bad reports about the home, some said they suspected that the two housewives had ulterior motives. Some said if you knew what to look for, you could find things wrong in any nursing home in Pennsylvania.
We've never found my grandmother to be in any kind of disarray at all. She's never been laying in her own excrement, has been said by various individuals. Never found her unfed, never found her unkept. She's always been in good spirits, crabby occasionally, which is natural when you're 90 years old.
John Praisner, 76, has been a patient in the home for 3 years. You don't want to move?
I don't want to move because it's, I have no reason to, Mr. Reasoner.
Did that impress you that 100 or so relatives were in this facility today to refute all of those allegations? That should tell you something.
Well, it tells me that there are, as usual, two sides to any story, and you know how to organize a reception committee.
It was all voluntary.
Frank Bach, his son, and a daughter all earn a living from the Golden Age nursing home, and they are fighting with everything they've got to keep that home open, even though they are currently operating at a loss because of fewer patients and the lack of federal funds. Bach is convinced his nursing home would be making money and operating under a clean bill of health were it not for Joanne Wells and Paula Snyder.
I don't know if they were motivated by another source that I'm unaware of. But they entered this institution back a year and a half ago. They were in this institution, and mind you, Mr. Reasoner, 20 minutes, and they never entered this institution after that.
I would think they would say, because we've spoken to them,
that they left in 20 minutes because the place made them sick. You're saying that when those two women, plus at least one inspector, probably several, had said there was a stench of urine and fecal matter in this place, that the halls were dirty, that the bedding was insufficient, that people were dressed in rags, that there were on a number of occasions no nurse on duty when there was supposed to be a nurse on duty. None of that has any truth in it at all?
There is no truth in it. Fabrications and lies. Not one employee has ever complained that there is poor nursing care in this institution.
Well, maybe not to Frank Bach, but they complained to us. In fact, on the day we visited the home, I was approached by someone who pressed this folded-up napkin into my hand. It had a message to call a certain phone number later in the day. When I called, I spoke to an employee of the home who told me that what we were seeing that day was a charade presented for our cameras. The person said that the reason for the surreptitious approach was fear of retaliation by Frank Bach. Others had similar fears, saying that Frank Al Bach is a powerful man in the county. He's one of its largest employers, and some folks said to us, it isn't very wise to mess with him. But people met with us anyway. A social worker charged that medication was improperly administered. Two former employees of Frank Bach told us that patients had been neglected and in some cases physically abused. Some of the people asked not to be identified, including this daughter-in-law of a former patient. She had saved Polaroid snapshots to show how her mother-in-law, who was on a specific liquid diet, got only solid food on a tray, regular fare. A member of the family had to show up at mealtime with a syringe full of the special fluid to feed her. Otherwise, her mother-in-law would have gone hungry.
When you came in every day, she was not clean or not?
No, she wasn't clean every day. I have to tell them.
The citations, the complaints against the Golden Age nursing home go back years. It's all here in the state record. What the two housewives say they saw during their 20-minute visit is not verifiable. But why would they make it up? Frank Bach even had a private investigator check the women out and could not impugn their motives. So what we seem to have is a conflict where everyone is right, depending upon which day one visits the home and where one looks. That raises some questions about how the state of Pennsylvania watches over a network of homes that cares for 87,000 senior citizens. Barbara Peters had one explanation.
We have good regulations, but we have lousy enforcement.
I can understand, I think, the attitude of surveyors when they have gone in and not always, but so frequently found an establishment out of compliance that it must be a real frustration.
Dr. H. Arnold Muller heads the Pennsylvania Health Department, the agency which oversees nursing homes. He believes that although keeping a deficient nursing home open may be frustrating to his surveyors, closing one could be disastrous to the patients.
People come to view their nursing home as their home, and they form relationships with other people, both patients and staff. And we know that even patients transferred out of homes that you and I think are not adequate suffer because of that transfer. There's a higher incidence of depression and of death. It's called transfer trauma.
Still, we reminded Dr. Muller that his own surveys indicated that patients at the Golden Age home were running some risk of trauma. We've looked at the survey reports that your people have done on this home where doctors were not summoned for the patients with a high fever or serious infections for sometimes some days. You also regulate hospitals. You wouldn't permit them to operate that way for 9 years, would you?
No, and again, we really haven't permitted this home to operate that way. We have cited them, and they have generally come around and complied again, only to fall back into their old habits. I'm aware of some of the circumstances that you mentioned there, and in each instance, we told them what ought to be done to avoid that, and for a while they would.
In a way, it almost begins to seem kind of casual, almost as if there was no purpose to it. For instance, January 77, no licensed nurse at each nurse's station, noted, by the way, as a repeat violation. Nursing home agrees to correct by February 11th. February 11th comes and goes. May 1980, you cite the same deficiency with a promise to correct. December 1980, same problem. May 1981, the same. Each time the owner says, by such and such a date, this will be fixed, and on it goes.
Why should he take you seriously after a while?
It wasn't our impression that the owner in this instance did not take us seriously. There were certainly instances where they measured up when we went back.
We have a regulation, actually, saying that if there is a cyclical pattern of deficiencies, that you have to move against them to close them.
And we have.
But you don't have to do it right away. In other
That's
words.
right.
You can wait 8 or 9 years or whatever, for as long as you think there is some chance of improving.
That's correct.
As far as Joanne Wells and Paula Snyder are concerned, that's the heart of the matter. They find it incredible that the state of Pennsylvania would wait 8 or 9 years to determine whether or not a nursing home with such a history of deficiencies would shape up.
Probably the people we should have gone to file the complaint would have been the SPCA. They don't give them an appeal procedure and allow them to keep the animal.
They take the dog away from you that day, and they fine you.
These are people.
Pennsylvania officials are still sending mixed signals to the Golden Age nursing home. Recently, state inspectors made new complaints against the home, including a case where eardrops were put into a patient's eyes. A week later, the state lifted its ban on new admissions. It says the home is now in compliance. The final decision on the Golden Age nursing home is expected this week.
Recently, the Chrysler LeBaron GTS challenged 3 of Europe's most celebrated sports sedans to a performance showdown. In critical tests, the LeBaron GTS decisively beat the Audi 5000S, the Mercedes 190E, and the BMW 528E. And the LeBaron GTS will keep on beating them.
It's a small company. In fact, you're looking at the entire staff. But to the client, they looked as professional as their biggest competitors. Maybe that's because they had the help of Team Xerox. Everything looked perfect with their Xerox memory writer. And they got big copier features right on their desk with a new Xerox Marathon copier. At 9 a.m., they presented their case. By 4 p.m., they got one, with a note saying, "Please thank your staff for such great work," which happily they did.
We got it! We got it!
Jacqueline Bisset, Christopher Reeve, their sensual, dramatic debut. Born to wealth and power, he was used to getting what he wanted.
Come away with me tonight.
But she was trapped in marriage to a man twice her age.
You will not let me go.
Yet their uncontrollable desire proved there is no stronger love than one that is forbidden. Anna Karenina, Tuesday.
Time is the enemy in the extraordinary world of organ transplants. Bill Curtis brings you the unforgettable drama of people hoping the gift of life will be theirs. Wednesday.
A chicken in every pot and a car in every garage was the American promise. But as Andy Rooney reports, what good's a car if you don't have a driveway?
There are 60 million private homes in the United States. Some of them are simple and some of them are fancy. Some homes have a basement, some don't. Some have a swimming pool, most don't. One thing almost all the 60 million homes have is a driveway. Americans want their cars nearby where they can get at them in a hurry. They want them as close to the door of their homes as they can be. If the cars aren't by the front door, they're by the side door. I hope this door opens in. Many houses have 2-car garages, but almost no one puts a car in either one of them anymore. When the garage door is left open, it becomes obvious from the street why the car is not put in the garage each night. 90% of all U.S. families own a car. More than half of them own at least 2 cars. Almost 20% own 3. A few even own 4. Like the garage, the driveway is never quite big enough. There never has been a driveway big enough in the whole history of driveways. Our driveways runneth over. The camper's the new driveway hazard. Often it's not only too big for the driveway, It's bigger than the house it's parked outside of. In many cases, the only thing to do is pull off the driveway and park the cars on the grass. The difficult driveway is a constant source of trouble to the people in the house it leads to. Some driveways are long. If you can't see the house for the driveway, rich people live there. Other driveways are so short, there's hardly room to park the car if you don't put it in the garage. Cement driveways crack eventually. You can't make grass grow on your lawn, and you can't keep it from growing between the cracks in your driveway. There are some expensive driveways made of brick. You wouldn't dare drive on this in a cheap car, and you'd probably have someone to drive on it for you, too. The driveway is an indispensable part of the American home. Where else would the paper boy throw the newspaper each day? You may not think driveways are important, but let me give you one figure. A car parked behind another car in the driveway with the keys removed and temporarily misplaced is the third biggest cause of divorce in America today.
In the mail this week, several letters about last week's interview with Fidel Castro. One said, "Why is it that Dan rather interrogates our friends and allies with a scowl on his face and fire in his eyes, yet interrogates Castro laughing and joking?" Followed by another letter that saw rather not laughing and joking, but boorish, cruel, and insulting. Can we not afford common courtesy to a tiny neighbor? About our story on the Weidman brothers, one of them a scholar, the other in jail for killing a man, a viewer said, "The brother in jail came across as a very intelligent, responsible person who has learned from his mistakes and should get another chance. And I'm a guy who thinks most people in jail should be forgotten." The most mail was about our story that looked into the practice of private hospitals dumping patients on public hospitals when they find they can't pay. One viewer recounted his experience. "The ambulance crew could not believe that before taking me to the emergency room, the doctor guided us to the reception room to find out if I had insurance. Then they sewed my hand back together. I wonder if they ever got the blood off the receptionist's typewriter." A doctor suggested we ask private hospitals if the public sector were to pay the private hospital at the same rate it costs to treat an indigent patient at a public hospital, would you take that patient? And finally, from another viewer, "When I phoned a local emergency room to contact a client who'd been brought there, the hospital operator asked, 'Is this the doctor?' 'No,' I said, 'this is the insurance agent.' 'I'll put you right through, sir.' I'm Morley Safer. We'll be back next week with another edition of 60 Minutes.
Cheer up. Take heart. You need never be intimidated by some software again. Because now, there's ability. Business software that's easy to learn. Business software that's easy to use. You've always had the drive to get ahead. You've always had the ability. But now, you have the ability.
Come on, America. Save on Firestone 721 radios and more during the Driver's Choice Sale.
America's driving to Firestone.
Save 10 to 25% on steel-belted radios, featuring our famous bestseller, the 721. Choose Firestone radios for light trucks. Even save on our popular S211 for imports. Or get MasterCare 8-point brake service. Now just $59.95. From America's #1 brake specialist. Choose Firestone today.
Firestone.
If you're shipping by Federal, here's another reason to switch to Airborne. $1 million. Because every time you ship anything by Airborne in the U.S. or internationally, we're keeping your air bill number along with your signature as your entry in our $1 million lotto. On July 15th, we're going to pick the $1 million winner. So the next time you're shipping a package by Federal, ship it by Airborne instead. Then you can count on delivery by 10:30, and Airborne may even deliver $1 million to you.
But when I was a tiny boy, I used to come down the plains. We lived about 3 miles west of here, and I would have 20 paper bags full of boiled peanuts. And every morning when I wasn't in school, I came down the plains and I sold my peanuts, which during the Depression years was a big income. It was $1 a day.
I would think so.
And then my first cousin and I also sold hamburgers. and ice cream. On Saturday mornings, we would freeze 3 5-gallon drums of ice cream, and we sold ice cream 3 dips for a nickel, and we sold hamburgers for a nickel. And we made a pretty good little income for farm boys. So, you know, this is just a place that brings back almost all pleasant memories.
Ten years ago this week, hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese refugees fled their homeland in panic. Today, many live their dream of freedom in America.
Nobody can come to my house without my permission. I don't have to report to anybody.
Ed Bradley reports in a special series, Vietnam Remembered, tomorrow on the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather.
Thursday, stolen relics sent Magnum on a mission of mercy, or is it murder?
You have a plan? Of course we have a plan.
And Simon and Simon get into deep trouble, helping a friend who's been framed.
Plan B. What was plan A?
And on Knots Landing, Greg schemes to destroy anyone who threatens his project.
We want Abby to disappear altogether.
Thursday.
This is CBS.